Good day. Welcome to the 71st episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. Today I'm going to talk about decolonizing the mind, DTM, and artificial intelligence. I'm going to talk about what is artificial intelligence, AI, how does DTM relate to it, and what are the challenges for the decolonial movement in regard to AI. Now, my interest in technology began at a very early age. I think when I was 15 or 16, I was very much interested in mathematics and physics and biology, the beta sciences. But when I moved from Suriname to Holland, the interest stayed, but when I became politically active, I didn't see the relevance of math, physics, and biology in my political work. So I started studying economics. And I must say that in economics, there's a lot of math that is used. I think that's not necessarily a good thing. In macroeconomics, the whole idea is model building, building economic models based on mathematics. But anyway, the interest in technology flourished with the introduction of personal computers. The first Commodore with tapes and floppy disk, the first programming language, Basics, later Visual Basic. I started programming for fun, and later, when I became a consultant in working as a private consultant, did project management. I did. I led some IT projects, developing applications for project management. So I learned to code, especially when with the rise of internet. Then you have .NET, Laravel, PHP. So I had to learn these languages, and when leading the projects, IT project, I led teams of IT coders writing applications, but obviously in applications much more than coding. It's also information analysis, putting up requirements, etc. So I had a long lasting interest in technology. I followed technology. But when I started writing my book, Decolonizing the Mind, I was very much taken up on the work. I worked for 12 years on it. So I didn't pay much attention to AI, but I picked up the last couple of months, starting reading into what is AI, how does it relate to DTM. Obviously, DTM is a chunk of it is an analysis of knowledge production. So AI relates to that. What kind of knowledge does AI produce? How does it produce it? How do AI models work? And what kind of decolonial movement do with AI? These are the questions I was pondering on in the last few months. I also saw that some people are afraid of AI. But in general, I would say I am afraid of technology because, every technology can be used in a positive and a negative way. And you can use an airplane to travel or to be used as a bomber, car as travel also, or as a tank, and the robots as a servant or as a master. And for people who are afraid of AI is a black box. You don't know how it works, so that's why you're afraid. But once you go into AI, obviously you will see the negative side of it, but also the positive. Now, from a DTM perspective, we start with the question, what is intelligence? So when we talk about intelligence, what do we mean? And here's a definition I use, that intelligence is the ability to produce, acquire, understand, and apply knowledge and skills to solve problems. So it is about knowledge and applying the knowledge with specific skills, obviously, to solve problems. Now, who has intelligence? Obviously, human beings and some animals have intelligence, although people thought that animals are only uh, instinct-driven creatures, that they don't have intelligence, only instinct. But humans and animals have brains, have emotions, have instincts, and this all interplay um, with with intelligence. For example, if you listen to Bob Marley's song "Emancipate Yourself from Mental Slavery," it is a song about knowledge. Yet the emotions that it arouses through the rhythm and the tones and the music awakens in yourself this idea of emancipate yourself from mental slavery. So emotions are part of knowledge, and instinct and the brain is part of knowledge. But all these things you don't see in machines. So you ask yourself, how does machine develop intelligence? How do they acquire knowledge? Now, in order to understand that, you have to understand how in DTM we look at knowledge. We look at the question, what are the sources of knowledge? Now, if you go through the history of Western philosophy and Western epistemology, where since the second half of the 17th centuries, intellectuals revolt against the Christian church, where the Bible decided what valid knowledge was. So you get people who say, look, the Bible is not the source of knowledge, but we get knowledge through observation and through reasoning. So we see a bottle of water, we turn it around and we see the water fall and we observe that. Then we are reasoning, asking why does the water fall? And so through thinking we come up with concepts like gravity to try to explain why water falls. Now, observation and reasoning is a huge part of knowledge. A lot of knowledge in modern world is acquired by observation and reasoning. And for Western Eurocentric epistemology, that's it. Those are the two only sources of reasoning. But then we argue that you have innate knowledge. What is freedom? Freedom is something you're born with. You know what freedom is. Animals know what freedom is. If you try to chain them, they will run away. There's something like innate knowledge. There's something like common sense. What's the difference between a snake and a rope? You might err in that, but common sense tells you that there's a difference between a snake and an elephant. And common sense is the knowledge that has been required in communities. And then you have social interaction. That knowledge is not only produced by individuals, by communities. How do you know that you're dreaming or not if you are the only person in the world? You can't know. So only if somebody wakes you up and say, hey, you're dreaming, then you know through social interaction what knowledge is. Then you have creativity. People are creative, can think of things. The famous example in Western science of Newton having an apple falling on his head, and then he comes up with this concept of gravity. And then imagination, that you imagine that you could develop your economy in a different way, like Deng Xiaoping combined socialism with market economy, is imagination. And then ethics has been separated in Eurocentrism from knowledge, because knowledge is there about true and false, not about right and wrong. Right and wrong is a subjective thing, so ethics is separated from knowledge. But in studying social relations, you will see that ethics is a crucial part of knowledge. And the source of ethics is spirituality, religion, belief in other things than the material world. So these are sources of knowledge. And then you ask yourself, from a DTM perspective, what is the source of knowledge for AI? Now, here's my answer. It's only one thing. AI doesn't have senses. You could put sensor on a machine, and then the machine can observe things, yes. But basically, if you leave out those senses, the source of knowledge for AI is reasoning. AI doesn't know ethics, it doesn't know right and wrong, but only true and false. So there's one source of knowledge. So remind you that if you think that AI is going to take over the world, they won't take over all the other aspects of the social world that are not based on reasoning and based on other sources of knowledge. Now, I had to figure out what is AI. And having been involved in programming in different languages, you know how a machine reacts to a program. The machine receives instructions from the program and executes them. So let's say you put up a screen and then you say put your first name, your last name, and press the button save. Then the machine does a few things. You can validate the input, but that is based on rules that you gave them. They can save the data in the database, and all this is done because you instruct the computer through programming and every step of the way. So with programming, the machine doesn't think, doesn't reason. So how is it possible then that you can develop something where a machine goes on to reasoning? That is only possible if you give the machine not instructions but data. Obviously data with instructions, but you give them data and then the machine tries to find a pattern in this data. And based on these patterns, it can produce new knowledge within instruction. For example, you give the machine images of all kinds of cats. Then it looks for patterns that can define a cat. What is a cat? Based on the patterns, it can decide whether a new image, you provide a new image, is an image of a cat or not. If you program a machine, then you give him a new cat, the machine doesn't know what to do with the image because the machine, through programming, reacts only on code. But if you give a machine data and the machine learns what a cat is through the data, then if you provide a new image of a cat, it can answer the question whether it's a cat or not. Why? Because it analyzes the pattern. So how does it analyze patterns? It uses mathematical tools. So you feed the data and it uses mathematics, all kind of mathematical tools, where it comes up with an answer. But then you have to decide, is the answer right or wrong? And how does the machine know if the answer is right and wrong? Because of a learning process. It learns through feedback from humans, later maybe from other machines, but from feedback it learns, oh, when you see this image, it's a cat, and a human can say, no, it's a dog. So then he has to go through the patterns again with his mathematical models to decide, where did I go wrong? Where did the math go wrong? The statistics to decide whether this is a cat or not. Now, so you feed the AI with data of images. Mathematics analyzes the pixels and concludes these are the common features of the images. But still someone has to tell the machine whether its conclusion is correct or not. And if not, the machine learns from the feedback to decide what was correct in the common features. So it's important to know who is teaching the machine. I'll come to that when we go to ChatGPT. Who is teaching the machine? And based on these common features, it can decide on a new image, which it was not presented with before, whether it's a cat or not. So let me give you an answer here. Now ask the question, who's Fidel Castro? Now, if you have traditional programming, it cannot think. So if you put a question, the only way is to answer it is go to a database where there's information about Fidel Castro, like Wikipedia. And then you could say, hey, I take the Wikipedia page and that's it. But it doesn't interpret the question. If in the database this phrase is not there, who is Fidel Castro, it cannot answer it. So the question should be in the database. And then it looks up the answer that belongs to the database. And if the question is not there, it can't give you the answer. But by AI, it's different. It looks at the question and it interprets the question to understand the context by learning from data and gave the most probable answer based on mathematical rules. And these models, when it comes to text, are called large language models. So they are trained on languages. And I'll go to do a bit of a technical thing now just to give you an idea to understand how does it work. For example, you give a computer only 3 words, data, what, who, and will. And then he has the data and he studies the data, and now the question is, what comes after the W, the first letter? It looks at the data and says, oh, there is 2/3 chance that an H comes after it and 1/3 that an I comes after it. The chance that an X follows the W is 0. So it studies the database of the 3 and it interprets the thing. And if you put who, it looks up the data and it has learned, okay, there's a W in it, the H in it. So if I'm looking for the word, I have to look of words which have a W and H in it and study those words. I leave out will because that's not part of it. So if you then say, what's the chance that after the W and H comes an O? It's 50% because you have only 2 words with W and H, and one is with the O and one is that is who, and the other is with A. Now, so what happens in this process? The machine is being trained to understand a question. So he looks up who is Fidel Castro, and then it understands, oh, the who is a word. And then in the training, it learns that it's a word in a language, let's say the English language. It has a meaning, which is a reference to a person. And that is something that by being trained on the data, it understands what it means. And in the same way, it can interpret the question and understand, oh, Fidel Castro, if I look at all my data on text, then apparently it's the name of a person. And it comes to that answer by studying all these texts that is being fed with, looks in the patterns of the text, compares it, gets feedback from persons, and then decides, okay, this is a question asking who is Fidel Castro. And then you have to answer the question. And where does the answer come from? And again, it's looking at all the data with mathematical rules, interpreting, and see, okay, this is a question about a person. What kind of information do I have of Fidel Castro? And then it goes to Wikipedia, it goes to all kind of databases, it goes through the internet, it goes to whatever data is given to him, and assemble this data and then construct a narrative about this person, Fidel Castro. And it does that all through studying data, patterns in data, getting feedback, and giving the most probable answers. That's why, for example, if you ask ChatGPT a question, sometimes it's asked you, it gives you more answers, 2 answers, and say which one is the best, because he constructs the answer on the basis of estimates. What would be the best percentage of correct answers which I generate? Now, so how does AI works? AI is fed with data. That's the basis, and it has been programmed to learn based on mathematical rules to find patterns in text, images, audio, movement, and it finds it with trial and error and feedback from humans, and in the future probably feedback for other machines. And based on these patterns, they can answer and interact with users. And what is important now is that this requires a lot of computing power. So the computing has to do with a technical aspect. Again, people who are not technical might get a bit scared, but I just want to say it's not a black box. It's understandable. So they use something called tokens and parameters to process what they get as input and what they put as output. And these tokens and parameters, that is what mathematics use. And a token is the smallest units of a meaning in a text. So they are the building blocks used by AI to process and understand language. W can be a token, but also who can be a token. A character and a word can be a token. And what AI does, the AI model breaks down the complex text into manageable pieces for processing. They form the input for the model to predict, generate, or analyze text, and they can be represented by numbers. That's why computation is so important in AI. And then it uses the mathematical rules and use something that calls parameters, which are variables, adjustable variables, within an AI model that are learned during training, and they determine how the model processes inputs like tokens to produce outputs. And parameters allow the model to generalize from training data and make predictions or generate context. So tokens are the input of the model and parameters are the output. So this is how a machine reasons. It gets inputs, it puts it into tokens and numbers, it got parameters, variables with mathematical tools, and try to understand all these tokens, what kind of pattern is it, and create a prediction. So that's the big difference with programming. So when you have ChatGPT and all the others, that is how they work. And these large language models, LLM, is a type of model to process and generate human-like text. And robotics is a different form of AI. So the models have been trained on vast amount of data and use different techniques to understand and produce logic. So I've gone into 3 of these large language models. There are more: Gemini from Google, ChatGPT from OpenAI and Microsoft, and DeepSeek from a Chinese company. DeepSeek, just a few weeks ago, even few days ago, created an uproar in the AI world because everybody thought that the Chinese were behind with AI, and now it turns out that the Chinese are catching up in a spectacular way. ChatGPT is investing 5 billion per year in developing AI. Google has invested 50 billion till 2024, and the Chinese has funds, high flyer, had DC developed with only 6 million US dollars, and by all standards of performance, it performs better. So there are companies that are make performances. Now, I put a question, who's Fidel Castro, to Gemini, and Gemini answers, Fidel Castro was a Cuban revolutionary politician who was the leader of Cuba from 1959 to 2008. He served as the Prime Minister of Cuba from 1959 to 1976 and President from 1976 to 2008. He led the Cuban Revolution, a left-wing uprising that overthrew the authoritarian government of Fulgencio Batista. Castro established a communist state in Cuba, nationalized industry, and implemented socialist reforms. His policy and actions, including the Cuban Missile Crisis, led to a long-standing political and economic rivalry with the United States. That's all Gemini has. It's not much, but I must say it's fairly balanced in the sense that it doesn't contain a lot of Western propaganda. Put the same question to ChatGPT. Then you got a long answer. Fida's biography is detailed, but then it comes with also an evaluation taken from the Wikipedia type of sources, which are Western sources, and then it says Fidel Castro remains a controversial figure, celebrated for his defiance of the US influence and condemned for his authoritarian rule. He suppressed political dissent, restricts freedom, and jailed opponents. So I asked ChatGPT, and then I tell ChatGPT, I think you're biased and Western centric in your description. And then it answers, thank you for pointing that out. Let me try to provide a more balanced perspective, emphasizing both the achievement and criticism of Fidel Castro while avoiding a strictly Western centric view. For supporters, Cuba was a visionary who prioritized equality and dignity for the poor. For detractors, his policies stifled economic growth, individual freedoms, and democratic government. Oh, here is the user trick. They think that balance means that you put two views and then you say he has supporters and he has critics. But you don't say who are the supporters and who are the critics, because that's important to understand the judgment whether it's balanced or not. If the detractors are people who are trying to kill the Cuban Revolution, organized economic boycotts, you don't mention anything about the boycotts, you don't mention the conditions under which Cuba has to operate, then you are not balanced. You know, you're putting two views, of which one of the views as just equal importance, not understanding that the other view is just part of a policy to kill the revolution, and that is the circumstances under which Cuba and its leader has to operate. So if you don't put out that narrative, you're not balanced. You know, you're just repeating it. I did the same with DeepSeek, and DeepSeek, I must say, has the same thing like ChatGPT. They are much alike in their answers, very long answers, etc. But even here, DeepSeek said his regime was characterized by significant social reforms, including improvements in healthcare and education, but also by political repression, human rights abuse, and economic difficulties. Castro's legacy remains controversial, with some viewing him as a champion of anti-imperialism and social justice, while others see him as a dictator who suppressed dissent and failed to deliver sustain economic growth. As if it doesn't mention economic boycott, that this, you know, put out all the possibilities to achieve economic prosperity. So I said, hey, that's an Eurocentric view of Castro. And then DeepSeek said, you're absolutely right to point out that many narratives about Fidel Castro, particularly those originated from Western or Eurocentric perspective, often emphasize his role in the Cold War, his conflict with the United States and his authoritarian government, while overlooking the broader context of his leadership and the perspective of those who support him, particularly in the global South. From a decolonized, so they mention now decolonize. DeepSeek knows this concept from a decolonizer global South perspective, and they link decolonization to global South perspective. Castro is often celebrated as a symbol of anti-imperialist resistance to the U.S. hegemony and social justice. So what you see is you can go into discussion with them. You don't have to think that the answer is correct, but you'll see that DeepSeek is more into acknowledging the global South sources and views than ChatGPT. So these are not objective knowledge producers. You know, Gemini is just very bad. It gives you short answers and it doesn't understand the thing. In the case of Castro, it did it well, but in many other cases, I saw that Gemini produces nonsense as answers. And ChatGPT is much better, but DeepSeek gives for me the best results from a perspective of the global south, and that is consistent with other benchmarking. When they benchmark the LLMs, they look at a lot of criteria, mathematics. They put a task for them, especially in the natural sciences where social consideration are less important. And this peak comes out as the best, one of the best. So what is the future for AI? You will see AI application in images, videos, and films already, astonishing what they can produce. You can't distinguish a video now produced by AI with humans, which you can't distinguish whether the human is being a real human, an actor, or somebody who has been drawn by AI. You see robotics, including industrial plants, self-driving cars, planes, self-driving LLMs, and there's something which is very important that's called AI agents. Now, AI can develop not only text and images, it can write programs. So AI can develop software. It can understand that if you give them a lot of text, which has trained that this text are codes, it can understand the codes and it can write the code. That's important. So AI can develop software. And the software developed with AI features are called AI agents. It's a software package that uses AI techniques to process information and take actions on specific goals. So you can have an AI agent working for you, knowing what your preferences are, being trained by you, and he can do the booking of your tickets of an airline based on your preference of the user. And the AI can perform tasks on your behalf. AI, the LLMs can help you build an agent. You don't have to have extensive knowledge of coding, although AI agents, those who know how to code, can build better AI agents, and everything that we know now with application and software in the future will be replaced by AI agents. These are the packages that have been developed by AI with AI features, and in the future a lot of these things will be built. So for the decolonial movement now, my point is we need to go into AI. The decolonial movement should develop AI, use AI agents, develop AI agents to improve our work in education, organization, communication, mobilization, and decolonizing the mind. What kind of agents do we need to build? Currently, I'm involved in a project with to develop a history app to teach young people about history. Now, the research for that normally it would be done by human researchers. If you build AI, you can have AI agents building that for you. So, conclusion, in the future, DTM, decolonial movement should go into AI. Very important. The next episode, I'll deal with another topic, Marxism and other philosophy of liberation, which came after my visit to Venezuela, where I argued that we need to set up trajectories of dialogue between different philosophies of liberation, and Marxism came out of the European Enlightenment. There are other philosophies of liberation in different civilizations, from Islam, Hinduism, indigenous philosophies, and we need to engage in some kind of dialogue between these liberation philosophies, which is more than dialogue between civilizations. This is really a dialogue about liberation. Now, when I wrote the book, I didn't have any reference to AI. I did talk about decolonizing mathematics and physics and biology, but I didn't touch on it. But I will in the future. You can download this PDF of the PowerPoint on sandahura.com. And if you want to support the DTM channel, subscribe to it, share it with friends, families, and colleagues, and encourage them to subscribe, get involved in discussion groups. And if you want to make a donation, go at sandahura.com to see how. Thank you very much, and I hope that I'll see you next time.